Hey guys, I am back with another episode of Psych Stories. I'm so excited for this one. But before we jump into that, I just want to remind you, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram at Dr. Jenny from the Block as well. So yes, I am smiling so big about this Psych Story because these two individuals they were very influential in the field of psychology, and they definitely paved the way for psychologists that look like me and others to, grace this field. So I am talking about none other than the great doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark, husband and wife duo. Yes, they are amazing. I wrote like a whole paper about them in grad school. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm just like, they're the bomb. They were the first Black psychologists to get degrees from Columbia University, which is a very prestigious school, especially when it comes to the field of psychology. They have a very strong psych program. So that already lets you know that these two individuals were coming, with that heat. And so I know many of you probably read the title and you're thinking like, ugly black baby dolls, doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark, desegregation, like what the hell is going on? I know, there's a lot. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about how these two wonderful pioneering individuals got involved with the fight for desegregation. So Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark started doing the doll studies, which is a very widely known study and something we learn and talk about in the field of psychology. But they started conducting these studies in the 1940s, and they were conducting it in various cities and states across the country. And the purpose of the doll studies was to assess the impact of segregation or discrimination, prejudice, etc. on the self-esteem of Black children. So what they did was conduct interviews with children that were aged between 3 and 7 years old. And what they would do was present 4 identical dolls to the children, and the only difference between those dolls were the skin color. And so in their study, and some of it has been recorded, and I'll share a little bit about, share those clips in this video. But what they did was ask the children, which doll do you prefer? So like, which one's the good doll, the pretty doll, and those types of questions. And so what they found was very startling. It was that Black children were showing a very strong preference for the white dolls and often assigned positive attributes to the white dolls. And when they, were asked to share their beliefs about the Black baby dolls, they described the dolls as ugly, as bad, and a host of other different derogatory and just negative terms. One such instance happened in rural Arkansas, in which they asked a young child to, identify which doll and looks like them. And the child pointed, smiled, and said, that doll's an N-word and I'm an N-word. So we're both N-words. And, both of them were blown away that this child, was smiling and pointing at this Black doll and using a racial slur to not only describe the doll, but their own selves and just how they had assumed like this identity. And, it was really heartbreaking. And they even talked about how they had conducted this study in the North and how some children couldn't even answer the question about positive attributes of themselves and would run out the door crying and just not answer at all. And so these studies were really showing the damaging and pervasive nature of racism, discrimination, prejudice, and how it was impacting Black children as early as 3 years old, right? Like, that's a lot. So, one thing I want to point out that dawned on me when I was learning more about them is that oftentimes people like to believe that, the North was the good place, the safe space where Black people, could live differently, which in many instances, for many reasons, was true, but racism was and is still in the North and so many other places, but we won't get into that today. But yeah, so it wasn't just children in the South that were exhibiting these very damaging impacts of racism. It was children across the country. And so I think that's really important to be noted, and to note that the doll studies have been replicated many times since the Clarks first conducted it in 1940s and have seen similar results even as recently in the last couple of decades.
The Black doll And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and she has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me?
Yeah, which one looks like you?
That one.
Okay.
That doll.
So what they concluded is that these prejudicial practices did negatively impact the psyche and the self-esteem of Black children. So fast forward to 14 years later to a group of lawyers and others who are working to overturn race-based segregation. So up until the 1950s, it was perfectly legal to have separate but equal facilities for the races. But the issue was these facilities were separate, yes, but they were far from equal. If you've ever taken a moment to look at pictures from, I won't even say the civil rights movement, just of American life before many of the big changes that happened through the civil rights movement, the facilities were not equal, especially in the schools. Students were getting old, outdated textbooks. So meaning information was being updated. White schools and white students were getting the most up-to-date materials, knowledge, etc. And children, Black children primarily, in the segregated schools were not getting that same material and were not being caught up to what was happening. So this group was working to bring this case in front of the Supreme Court in order to overturn that and work on desegregation for the purposes of integrating schools so that students would have access to equal facilities. And so this is known as Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, but more commonly we call it Brown versus Board of Education. And so it was through this work that Dr. Mamie and Kenneth were tapped to provide expert testimony. And here is where, insert the doll studies and how this helped move along one of the biggest cases of the 20th century. So Dr. Kenneth Clark provided testimony in the Briggs, Davis, and Delaware cases and also helped co-author the summary of the social sciences testimony, which was also endorsed by the other social scientists that were tapped to provide testimony and just expertise in terms of this matter. And so, with that, segregation in these public facilities were overturned, which was a great, huge victory in which the Clarks played a part in. Specifically, their doll studies information was presented in the case as well, which I think, although it was not the sole piece that, convinced the judges, it was an integral piece in the testimony that they presented to the Supreme Court. So snaps to the Clarks, right? And with that, I want to add just a little history piece. Although segregation was overturned, there was no plan outlined in the document of how desegregation was going to happen. It was just expressed that it should happen quickly. And so insert stories like the Little Rock Nine and other people across the country, Ruby Bridges, all these people who ended up leading the way for desegregation by going to these hostile spaces. So I just also want to name and acknowledge that there are so many others following that did the work of actually entering these school spaces. And I just want to say thank you to those people because they are amazing. And so although the Clarks may primarily be known for the doll studies, they did a number of amazing things and they contributed widely to the social sciences and honestly contributed to the progression of our country. And so I recommend that you do additional research about them and all the programs that they started in New York, and just how those have had ripple impacts throughout the communities and honestly across the nation. So I hope you all enjoyed today's Psych Story. I was really happy to talk about them. They are amazing, and just, you know, bring light to the doll studies. Like I said, you can look up information. It has been replicated, and there are videos out there that kind of demonstrate what the children were experiencing if you are interested in learning more about it. But until the next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch y'all later. All right, bye.